Emmanwori, Grey Zabel, Kaleb Johnson. We're talking NFL draft prospects today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins, and we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much.
Joe, happy National First Day of Franchise Tag Eligibility Day to you here today on Locked On NFL Scouting.
Kyle, there are at least 10 teams that are just heartbroken that T. Higgins is not going to be on their team, you know?
Yeah, and it sounds like the Bengals are going to get this done, right?
They're at least going to tag him.
James Rapine had the report.
Yeah.
Sources indicate the Bengals expected to tag T. Higgins, and I saw some additional reporting that Cincinnati is set to embark on an ambitious offseason, which means keeping their three best players that need their contracts adjusted.
Should any other team would have no problem with this. You have plenty of cap space. You have levers to pull. Keep your best players. But, man.
So I guess that's my concern for Cincinnati. And the point of today's show is not to talk about the Bengals and the franchise tag with T. Higgins, but my concern was don't use that as an excuse to be complacent everywhere else, right? And just be like, oh, well, we'll fill in some gaps with some low-level free agents and we'll try to hit the draft out of the park, and we kept our guys, and there you go.
What was your immediate reaction to the news? Must have been last week that Jermaine Pratt has requested a trade.
I get it.
But as something went in one ear and out the other faster, then
I was so secondary to the other players, right? That sat here and have requested a trade, and
it's like, oh, you want a trade? Okay, yeah,
okay, buddy, kick rocks, right?
Get in line, baby, get in line.
I actually would not be surprised if Jermaine Pratt does get traded.
Would make more sense. Some higher profile guys, have obviously tried to do that, but maybe they would. Maybe they would move on from Jermaine Pratt. Anyways,
compelling linebacker. Yeah, draft class. There's a player that we're going to talk about that sometimes plays linebacker, and Nick Emmanwori, the safety from South Carolina, who is our starting point for today's show. If you like big safeties, this is like the deluxe type of player that we're going to talk here. 6'3", 227 pounds. Unofficial measures for Nick. Would you be surprised if he has 33+ inch arms when it's all said and done either?
No, I think those are legit measurements. I think that's what he is.
Yeah, he certainly looks like it. And anytime you could get a player like that who has suddenly ball production in zone coverage, and then simultaneously, did you watch the Alabama tape?
I didn't.
When you get a chance, there's a couple of Jalen Milroe runs in the open field, including one that breaks for a big game, that you are just sure is going to be a touchdown. And then Emmanwori hawks down Jalen Milroe in the open field to run down an angle and make a tackle. That's the kind of pop, juice, explosiveness we're talking about with this football player.
Yeah, it's all about those physical traits, right? I mean, you mentioned the size. He's big. He's really, really athletic. He can cover a ton of ground. I mean, that linear explosiveness is absolutely legit. And like you mentioned, there's ball production, the zone coverage ability to, be an athlete and go make a play on the ball. Obviously he has a ton of wingspan, ton of ability to erase space. And that got him to the football several times. And so there's a lot of attractive qualities, I think, especially as you've seen some of these bigger safeties like a Kyle Hamilton, like a Jeremy Chin, these guys being able to carve out roles. You could see the path for him. Physical traits. That's the big appeal and how that's led to making plays. I think that's what gets me excited about Emmanwori.
I think I do want to be fair too. I think instinctually in the shallow areas of the field, I think he's a pretty refined player in that regard too. He's got a lot of versatility as far as utilization. 1,600 snaps in the box are at nickel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really whether he's a sub package stack player in nickel defenses, or you're in too high safety and you're rotating, spinning one of the safeties down into the box to play hook coverage. I think a lot of his intermediate zone stuff is really where he does really well, whether that's as a robber or whether that's in hook assignments or whether that's in nickel and you're pushing the boundary for like a depth flat drop. Those are areas where you see, I think, pretty good route dispersion. But it's just transitionally when you're this big,
high hips, yeah,
you have to be a really special cat to not have an extra hitch in your transition, which I think is the thing where if you get him matched up against super fluid tight ends in the slot or against slot receivers, and you're going to ask him to match, whether that's zone match or that's off man, I just don't think that's going to be an area where he has a lot of success.
All right, I agree with that. I don't think he'll face too many guys that'll be overly able to exploit that, but it's worth pointing out. And I thought with some of his deeper drops, I felt like he was a bit of a coverage drifter at times with zone. And like, I think you're right about some of those shallows being better for him, but some of those deeper alignments, it's like you're drifting. Right. Let's be tighter here. I also thought like his downhill trigger at times was kind of hit or miss. Was the LSU game was the first one that I watched, and I'm like, man, there's just a couple of instances where I felt like he was stuck or like was a little bit off on the angle, or like the trigger just wasn't exactly how I wanted it to be in terms of like, man, you're a 230-pound safety, like just go. And I would say even with some of his take on stuff, with taking on some contact where you like maybe expected a little bit more for his size, but I think there's a really high ceiling here, man. Different kind of player. You know, I don't think every defense will be lining up for him, but I think Dan Quinn's going to have a hard time not drafting this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, you mentioned the names like Kyle Hamilton, who I think Emmanwori athletically is probably the closest thing we've seen to a profile of a safety since Hamilton, as far as just the build and the stature and the explosiveness and the length and all of the above. I think Hamilton has an extra gear as far as just the instinctual play.
Right.
And that can include playing on the roof, not as a high post player, but like as a deep half player, where you mentioned some of that stuff with Emmanwori and maximizing his real estate to properly leverage as many routes as possible. But then there's guys like Jeremy Chin, who you mentioned, Kyle Duggar from the same draft class is another player that's kind of built in a similar fashion. And you've seen some of these guys come into the league and taking like J-Ron Curse is nowhere near as athletically dynamic as what Nick Emmanwori is. And he found some impact for himself as an NFL defensive player.
Yeah. If he goes the right spot, man, I think there's a lot to unlock. Ceiling is really, really high with Emmanwori. Projection's always hard with safeties, man, right? Like, so I don't know. You could tell me he's a top 20 pick. You could tell me he's a top 50 pick. I'd probably believe you.
Right.
So
can we set a floor?
When does Washington pick in the second round?
All right. So Tankathon NFL full draft order.
Who is that? Who's that player in Dallas that Quinn just couldn't stop playing on the second level? Was it Quinn? I want to say Quentin Bell.
No, Quentin Bell's an edge player. You're thinking of, is it Donovan Wilson?
No.
Marquise Bell?
Marquise Bell. Yeah, I was crossing up my bells. Marquise Bell. Yeah.
6'2", 205 from Florida A&M. So just think about that. And then this guy's got an extra inch and 20-something pounds.
Right. Be a better option. Playing on the second level.
And you mentioned that LSU game, and that interception he had in that game with that drop in the red zone and getting underneath that corner route was really, really good.
Yo, he has some interception returns that you're like, yeah this dude's flying around
with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, he's got it. All right, so that's Nick Emmanwori. Coming up next, we're talking running backs, Kaleb Johnson out of Iowa. Folks, be sure to stick with us. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you could stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game more exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Kaleb Johnson, running back, University of Iowa Hawkeyes, listed at 6 foot, 225 pounds. For my money, Joe is probably the best wide zone back in the class with how he presses the line of scrimmage and the one-cut ability that he has once the point of attack has been appropriately stressed and popped, or when he gets to the sideline, he's got to turn north.
I think that's the name of the game with him, right? That zone running profile is really outstanding, and I think it accentuates his two best qualities, maybe his three best qualities, which I thought were like his patience, his vision, and how he just squares his pads when he gets downhill.
Yeah.
And then he's got that ability to kind of like bend, which is like really important with his tracks to maximize those zone opportunities. Where you saw him really get some explosive runs doing that. So yeah, dude, like wide zone teams should love this player. And I don't even think Iowa doesn't really run a lot of gap.
The 3-year sample size, which includes 508 carries for Kaleb Johnson at Iowa the last 3 years, 376 zone runs, 128 gap runs.
Yeah.
They've had no more than 48 gap runs in any of his 3 seasons with Kaleb Johnson as a runner.
That checks out based on watching the film there. Man, he's smooth too. There's a smoothness to him. I wouldn't call him like twitchy. Don't get it twisted.
Yeah, I don't think he's overly explosive. I think that was one of the things that I took the biggest exception with the tape is like, man, I wish you had just like an extra gear when it was time to put your foot in the ground and ruin some second level angles.
Well, and that's what I think you watch him initially and you're like, am I watching Le'Veon Bell? And then I think you keep going. You're like, man, I don't know. He's got the lower body elusiveness that you saw from Le'Veon, but I think there are some stylistic comparisons. If that was the name you invoked, I would understand it because of that patience and then like just a really good decision maker and really good vision. I'm just very comfortable with how he sees it and how he responds. A lot of translatable stuff with his profile.
Yeah, really, really likable player. The rushing profile is obviously off the charts. Another bigger back that didn't have some explosiveness that kind of went in a range in which I could totally see him getting drafted. Stephen Ridley is another player that I saw a little bit of when I watched his film. But you mentioned this, the slipperiness, and it was over 60 missed tackles forced this year as a ball carrier. They happen on the edge. They happen in the alley. They happen in the backfield. It's just really good body control for a player of his regard, and there's a fluidity in the way in which he runs that I think is very easy to admire, and then he pairs that with great processing, which is a good combo.
Yeah, and I think his passing down profile, like didn't see him run a ton of routes, but he looked like a good option for getting the football to in space, and then like the same characteristics with the vision, long strider, smooth, he can kind of eat away at it. But I'm going to defer to you. I know you studied the pass pro. What can you tell us about pass pro? And maybe did you see more route running in your exposures?
So he had 54 pass block reps, according to Pro Football Focus, in 3 years combined.
Oh wow.
So
okay.
we're more so deferring to the tight ends with all the 12 personnel stuff and the fullback that we have at Iowa.
Yeah.
I don't think he's particularly developed in that regard as a result. I think anytime you have a player with a build like this, you do kind of have to reconcile opportunities versus expectation, right? You see 226-pound back, you kind of have a feeling of how he's really going to attack guys. And this has been a backs who block process or brand podcast for quite some time, right? So I think you do have a little bit of conflict. He's good hands, but Iowa's offense, I think, was the biggest limiting factor, where they're very vanilla as far as the passing game involvement for the running backs.
I think that's one of my favorite things about Jonson, though, is it felt like there wasn't a lot of respect defensively for their ability to really throw the football. I would guess his percentage of carries against heavy boxes was really, really high. And I thought that, while it was probably frustrating for him, gave us an opportunity to really see him navigate a lot of congested areas. And like, there's definitely some muddy moments, but I don't know that they were on him. It's like those gaps would like disappear quick. They got a lot of bodies flying downhill. It's like, I don't know what you were supposed to do, but sometimes he'd get out of it.
Right.
But yeah, I don't have the data, but I would guess his heavy box count rush percentage is high.
Let me see. You want to filibuster for me a second? I can probably pull that up.
I would like to know what that is. Because when you said that, it made me think, I thought you were seeing routinely 8-man boxes, and I don't like, who was their quarterback? Was it McNamara? Like, what?
Yeah.
Dude, like, what are we doing here? That was a tough scene. While you're looking that up, I wrote down 3 names. You mentioned Stephen Ridley. I wrote down Arian Foster, Deshaun Foster, and James Conner for anybody that didn't watch football 15 years ago and can relate to my Foster references. But I think that's kind of the profile of runner that this is.
So are we counting 8-man box plus only?
Eight would constitute. Neutral would be 7 and light would be 6.
Okay. I'm glad we're on the same page as far as defining that, because I know not everybody is on the same page.
There's no other way to do it. Kick rocks if you see it another way. I don't have anything to say to you.
So he averaged 5.1 yards per rush on 90 attempts against 8+ men in the box.
90 attempts. How many total carries did he have?
He had a grand total of 240. So it was more than a third.
It's a pretty high percentage, yeah.
So I think what pops here as well is he actually had more impressive like third down conversion rates against the heavy boxes than he did for his total body of work. Now, some of that is we're backed up. It's 3rd and 20. We're just going to run the ball and punt because we're Iowa, right? But
dude, if you're Iowa and you get a holding penalty, that's it. Just go ahead and punt.
Your drive is over. You just punt on 1st and 20.
Go ahead and punt the ball. Not going anywhere. So I guess this is one of my prevailing thoughts coming out of watching and studying Kaleb Johnson. I like him. I think he's a good player.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's a starting running back in the NFL. I feel good about that. I do find myself a little surprised that it's not uncommon for me to see him mocked in the first round. I don't know that I saw a first-round running back.
I did not. I have a fringe 2-3 on Kaleb Johnson.
That seems so much more appropriate. And like you've seen this too. You see this guy getting mocked in the first round. Yeah. It's like,
and I'm wondering if Daniel Jeremiah is about to do it, because he just said he filed mock draft 2.0 and he put 3 running backs in the first round.
3.
He said he put 3 in the first round.
Okay, so
I
bet it's Genty, Hampton, and Henderson.
So you don't think Jonson would make it in for him?
No.
But I know some people that I have a great deal of respect for the work that they do in this industry have been putting him up there for a while.
Really? I guess I'd be surprised. He doesn't scream like, got to have this in the first round. But then again, Najee Harris somehow goes in the first round and Jonathan Taylor
Najee Harris is out there.
I know.
Available to be signed.
Signed.
One of just a handful of guys with more than 1,000 rushing yards in his first 4 seasons, right?
Right, dude. No question.
Never mind how many touches he got to get there.
He never crossed the Peyton Barber line, so that's a big dub for him.
Is there? I'm looking at like the back 10 picks in the first round. So we've acknowledged this is like a really good wide zone system runner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some teams that have or had wide zone affiliations. The Rams at 26, but they just drafted Corum and have Kyron Williams.
And only Kyron Williams will touch the ball.
And only Kyron. Well, no, that'll change.
I don't know. McVay believes in having a guy. I love McVay, but that's somewhere where I don't see it the same way.
Big time conspiracy with both Mike McDaniel and Sean McVay drafting running backs in the middle rounds last year, and then proceeded to never let any of them touch the football. So you do have the Rams with a background in that system. Houston with Slowick had branches. They've obviously made the change at offensive coordinator and moved on from
running back Joe Mixon.
That's right. Well, there's an exit ramp there if they want it. Minnesota, are any of these teams looking like a running back destination for you?
Maybe Minnesota, maybe.
But at 24, right?
I wouldn't do it. But there's 3 in the first round, Kyle Krabs. Who's picking these running backs? Denver?
Or I was going to say, are we assuming maybe Denver and Pittsburgh pick them? We're going to Genty and then Denver and Pittsburgh?
Whatever team drafts Genty, I'll have no questions about that.
Raiders? Would you take no exception with the Raiders at 6 picking Ashton Genty?
I'd take massive exception. Oh, the Raiders. I don't know.
They signed Rodgers.
Yeah, I think it's consumed. I think a lot of Genty. So that
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That's I'd probably be okay with that.
So instead, Cleveland at 33, depending on what they do at quarterback. If you told me they drafted Kaleb Johnson, I'd be super down for that.
I think Cleveland has the most significant draft capital of any team in this class, right? They control
has that draft asset power ranking. They do.
They're number 1 by a significant margin. Browns, Jaguars, Raiders control this draft.
Yeah. Let's change that. Let's put the draft through South Florida and Western New York.
I'd like to give some of the draft capital to the Browns. I'd like to strengthen the Browns.
Right. So I mean, more of the draft go, I guess, through Cleveland then in that regard.
Yeah, send it south to
push
Cleveland.
Buffalo down even further then.
Sure.
They're sitting here at 14. That's way too high. Put them dead last.
Yeah, they got those 2 second-round picks. Give it all to the Browns, baby. Send Newsome and Myles Garrett. Let's start the season tomorrow.
All right, let's chill out a little bit. I think that's a little too much. All right, so we have Grey Zabel. Speaking of somebody the Browns may have some interest in, I think there's a lot of teams that are going to have some interest in Grey Zabel from North Dakota State. We're going to talk about him to finish here today on Locked On NFL Scouting. Stick with us. Did you feel the hesitation?
No, I just need to know, does that count as you doing the ad break right there?
Yes.
You get credit for that? Wow. Okay.
Yes, because I did the segue, both in and out, and click the button. Did you feel the hesitation when I went to click the single roll instead of the double roll, though?
I didn't feel it. No, I had. You took control of the moment. I figured you knew what you were doing. So
I almost goofed it up.
It's a wonder we do these a solo show
right every day. Well, that's the difference. You usually do the day of show beforehand, and I usually finish recording with you and then go do my day of show.
So and you get a little primer. Yeah. Look at that. You get to
I always get in and I'm like, Joe, what are the ad reads for today?
Right.
And you're like, I did it last night.
Sometimes.
What do you want to know?
I've been a little bit more of a first thing in the morning guy, but
it's the off-season vibes, right?
Yeah. And I get so nervous about like the news cycle, and like all of a sudden, you have a show and then something happens and it's blown up, and it's like, if I were to record my show for tomorrow this morning and something crazy happens, it's not good. So
then it just run 6. There's nothing wrong with running 6 shows.
I will and have. So all right, Grey Zabel.
Go ahead. I'm going to give you the floor here.
605 North Dakota State. He played left tackle this year, but he's played all the positions at some point in his career, like a decent amount of snaps across the board. 605.3 verified, 316 verified, 32 and a quarter inch arms. That's all verified from the Senior Bowl. Yeah. College left tackle, or at least the last season left tackle, interior guy at the next level. And I understand he's played a little center at North Dakota State. And I understand he took some reps at center at the Senior Bowl. My favorite thing with Zabel is the run blocking. He's tenacious, dude. Like, I love the way he gets after people. His ability to like roll his hips into contact and accelerate his feet and move bodies, like that shows up. He's got really good range to be able to not only like work laterally, but get out into space, longer pulls. It's all A+ stuff, man. And so there's a lot to get into, but when I think about like what do I really love about Zabel, that's what popped for me. And he's a good athlete too. Like he's not like just like you sometimes say that and it's like it's a 350-pound, just big old dude that can't move. Like, no, Zabel's very athletic as well.
So I want to set the table here for him as a player. He's from Pierre, South Dakota, played his high school football for TF Riggs as a 240-pound offensive tackle. Didn't have a lot of interest as a result of being a 240-pound offensive tackle, but he was a three-sport athlete, played basketball and baseball in addition to playing football. Is a two-way player before settling on offensive line at North Dakota State. Has played more than 2,400 snaps. Log starts at left tackle, left guard, and right tackle throughout the course of a 5-year career. So versatility is through the nines here. You mentioned the tenacity. The chance to see him at the Senior Bowl, it really negated what I thought a lot of the major concerns were on his tape based off of playing at tackle, where the length, you felt how he got stressed playing on the edge.
He's like reaching for it, right? Like he wants that air to go away, but it just didn't very quickly.
So, but despite of that, he probably played his best game of the season against Colorado in the season opener.
That's where I started.
And was really good playing up against an FBS opponent. And then obviously they went on to win the national championship. He's going to be 23 years old at the end of March. So he'll be a 23-year-old rookie with 5 years of playing experience at North Dakota State. We mentioned the positional versatility and flavors that he's had all over the map. He even played 14 snaps as center in 2022 of like actual game action.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're looking at another one of these small school pipeline type players that is going to come in, and because they've had to learn the technique and fundamentals of the position because of what their backgrounds were and not being silver spoon offensive line players that are just so used to just bullying everybody across from them because they were Evan Neal size when they were 16 years old. Right. I think it's really set the table here for now and he had to live in the world where he played tackle. Well, now life's going to be easier for you as a quick strike player who likes having no air in his pass sets because now you're not playing outside anymore, but you had to, because of your athletic background, become a very technically proficient player very fast. And that's how you've reached this level. And it doesn't take like all of the projection out of looking at him to the next level, but it feels like it's very complementary hurdles that he has had to clear to get to this point where now, hey, oh, by the way, we're going to play you inside where it's going to lean into everything that you like about playing. And you're 316 pounds because you've developed your body and you're technically proficient because you had to be. This feels like a plus starter, like very quickly.
I like all of that. And I like how you mentioned how the things that concern you watching him at tackle are mitigated on the inside because he's not reaching for it. And like, he wants to get after people. And when, there were some vertical sets where he did have to like be patient and sit on his hips and like leverage, but he wants hands on. He wants it. And he'll be much more able to do that on the inside.
He even made that leap from 23 to 24 where like penalties were a big problem for him in 23. He had 8 penalties called against him, and that number dropped big time in 24 too.
Good. Well, and looking at his snap distribution, 2024 was the first year where he really just played one spot.
Yeah.
Every other year it's 2-3 different spots, and that's probably difficult.
With triple-digit snaps, yeah.
Yeah, so now he gets like, okay, you're the left tackle. Now that'll obviously change next year, but I think that probably speaks to, like settling into a spot and playing your best ball as opposed to flipping around, probably on a somewhat weekly basis.
I'll tell you the most jarring thing was seeing him side by side with Wyatt Milam at the Senior Bowl from West Virginia,
Mhm.
who had the buzz of top 50 player. He played left tackle at West Virginia. You knew there were some length concerns with Milam as well. Both guys are kind of built the same way where they don't have, like, Zabel's thicker through the core. Milam's a little bit more top heavy, but neither one of these guys is like the big, you think about the Mayockisms and the bubble butt and all like the all of the body mass in the lower half. They're not really built that way, both of them, despite the fact that they're both like 6'5". But seeing the core strength, coordination, and hip control that Zabel has directly next to a player that's built exactly the same that played at the FBS level in Milam in West Virginia, it was like really, it's what part of why you love those evaluation opportunities, to see those little things side by side. But it was very jarring, the differences between the two. And it, for me, like, I came in liking Zabel, and I had graded him as a tackle because I wanted to see where the length was. And then I regraded him as a guard, and his grade obviously goes up.
Sure. Yeah.
And Milam, I had graded as a guard to begin with, and all of that was affirmed, but it created this even larger chasm between the two, despite the fact that they profile physically and build-wise very similarly.
What do you think the range is here? I'm starting to see this guy sneak into some mock drafts here at the end.
Well, the last 2 weeks I put him to Seattle at 18, 19, 18. Now you get the feedback from Seattle about quotes from John Schneider about offensive line valuation and how it's overvaluated or overvalued and this, that, the other thing, and they don't think he'd pick it. I'd say that's fine. But if you looked at
Houston,
and here's the thing, you play guard or center, right? So now you have a vacancy. You could tell me Green Bay picks him to take over at center for them. I think that'd be a no-brainer.
Oh, yeah, of course.
With Josh Myers leaving in free agency.
He fits all the Green Bay things.
I could look at Arizona, Cincinnati, Seattle in the teens. I think you could make an argument for if you wanted to pick an interior player versus the rest of the board at that range. Green Bay at 23. Houston at 25.
Why isn't Minnesota in this conversation? I think the guards have been bad for like 5 years now.
Minnesota.
It's kind of a perfect fit, right?
The Ravens and the Lions have a potential vacancy at guard. Zeitler leaving Detroit. Feels like their kind of player, 315. He's dense enough. It's not like he's a tiny player. You could tell me Kansas City picks him. Philadelphia's got a vacancy there with Mekhi Becton at right guard. You could talk yourself into probably the back half of the first round, almost every team.
And like 39 is the Bears, 41 is the Bears, 43 is San Fran.
Yeah, if you're a team like Dallas or Miami dreaming you're going to get this cat in the second round, you're
48. Yeah, 48.
You're living a dream. There's no way he's getting down that far on the board, I think.
He'd be a nice fit for Miami, right? Like everything you hoped Liam Eichenberg would be, I think, is what Grey Zabel is. But I don't know if he gets that
with
far.
Good balance and an ability to stay off the turf.
Helpful things, for sure. Yeah,
helpful things. I think that's actually more of what Wyatt Milam is, to bring it full circle with that observation of that play. That's my comp for Wyatt Milam. It's Liam Eichenberg. So,
I thought my comp for Wyatt Milam is Grey Zabel.
The discount version of Grey Zabel. It's my comp for Wyatt Milam.
Let's be trendsetters. Let's start comping players within the same class. You know?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It just further double down on the opportunity to be right. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino. We appreciate you guys as always for checking out Locked on NFL Scouting. We will be back again tomorrow. We hope to see you then. Peace.